So welcome to the Start a Group Practice webinar. Today we are going to be having a discussion with Casey Compton and Allison Pigeon, both of which are two women business owners that are amazing. Both of them are consultants with Practice the Practice, and I highly respect. And I got to hang out with them this summer at Slowdown School here in Northern Michigan, where we worked on our businesses, we helped other people work on their businesses, and they gave tons of consulting advice to people. And so welcome to the webinar. Casey, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I was telling Allison before we started recording that I went to a coffee shop this morning to work on a book that I'm writing. So that was fun.
Oh.
Allison, how about you? How are you doing this morning?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Yeah, it's afternoon now. Yeah, I'm doing well. I'm in the process of hiring therapists, so I've been having some interviews, which is exciting.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Cool. Well, those of you that are with us today that are live, we're going to have a time to ask questions down at the bottom. You'll see the chat area. Feel free to throw any questions in there. When we get to the Q&A section of this, we will dive into your specific questions. If it's for one person, please make sure you put that person's name. So for example, Allison, I have a question about this, or Casey, I have a question about this. So if you want a specific person to answer it, today, really, we don't have a set agenda in the sense that we have slides or things like that. We wanted to have a three-person dialogue about what it's like to have a group practice. So I have a private pay group practice. Allison has a mixed model of private pay and insurance, and Casey has a predominantly insurance-based practice. And so we all have kind of different styles that we've done our group practice, and we've all been very successful with that. So we're going to be having a dialogue. We're going to start by talking about who should consider group practices. Even if you're just getting your practice going, it's good to think with this mindset, because if you have that as kind of a goal that you want to do in the next 6 months or a year, or maybe you're not even sure when you would want to start that, it's good to kind of know where you're headed so that you can set these systems up from the beginning, even if it's just you as a solopreneur. Then we're going to talk about some of those first steps. So deciding whether you want to do W-2 or 1099s or a mixed model, what kind of accounting, hiring, all of those first steps that you need to do. Then we're going to move into processes. So what do you need to consider when you're first launching that group practice? What are some kind of things that we've each learned through that process? And then we want to talk about kind of long-term growth. So once you get it going, what are things to consider? If you kind of have this big picture snapshot of where you're headed in a group practice, it makes it a lot easier to launch it. Beyond just their consulting, Allison and Casey both have mastermind groups that help people that have group practices. Allison has one that's called Start a Group Practice Mastermind. And so that's a small group of people that are all starting group practices. So if you're at that point that you're ready to kind of level up, next level practice is included in that mastermind group. So you don't miss out on any of our content. You just level up and then get some more individual attention. And then as you grow, Casey has a mastermind group that's called Start a $1 Million Practice Mastermind. And it's all about how do you really get that insurance-based and private pay-based model going so that you can really scale big. And so kind of no matter your phase of practice, they can help you out. Or if you just stay in next level practice, that's totally fine too. So after we cover the long-term growth, we're going to then do some Q&A. And we're going to allow you to just ask any questions. And we're also going to be saving this recording within our next level practice community. So why don't we start, Allison and Casey, who do you think should consider a group practice? Or maybe even start with, how did you consider a group practice when you were first getting going? Allison, why don't you kick it off? Like when you were first considering that, what made you think, you know what, maybe I should start a group practice? And then we can also tie that into what other people should consider.
Yeah, sure. So when I started out, I realized that I could make a lot more money potentially, sort of semi-passive income if I brought on other contractors. And so I had experience managing people working in community mental health. And so that part was familiar to me. And I was kind of lonely in private practice. So I thought it'd be cool to have other people around. And so, so those are kind of the decision points that I thought about when I was considering starting.
Yeah, I think that point of just even the income side, to think about, when I open my door and I see all the other offices' doors are shut because people are in sessions, I'm like, even if I do, just Facebook stuff that's not actually generating income and I'm working on the business, if my profit margin is say 30%, then that's the equivalent. If 3 doors are shut, that's the equivalent of me being in a session. If 3 times 3 is 90, so pretty close to my 100%. And so that's something that, I think people often start with is, how do I start to scale so that I don't lose money if I go on vacation or take days off, and also optimize my practice space? Casey, what about you? What were some things that when you were first looking at it that you were considering when you started your group practice?
Well, mine is very similar to Allison. I went into the group practice arena with the financial picture in mind. I really wanted to know that, so many of us in private practice, we get in there and we do a great job and we know that we do a really good job and we take good care of our clients. But what happens if we get sick, or if something happens that we don't have control over, and then what? I was in a position that was a little scary, so I knew I wanted something to be built to where if I couldn't physically do the work, that I would still be able to support my family.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point because the typical solo practitioner, they'll go on vacation and they just have to save up money for taking those week or two off. Or if you have a down month, I know a lot of people in the summertime see a dip in their numbers, and maybe around Christmas when people are taking times off at the end of the year before they kind of get back in the swing of things. If you're a solo practitioner, there's no additional income other than what you've saved up. So for the people that are here, what are things you think that they should consider? What are some of the bullet points that you'd say, before you start a group practice, you want to consider these things?
Yeah, I can go.
Yeah, we'll have a conversation more.
I wasn't sure who was going first.
And the three of us, we just chatted it up at Slowdown School when we have our Zoom meetings talking about practice the practice. We all just kind of jump in. So I'll do less of the directing, and if you're inspired to kind of share, then I'll let you just jump on and interrupt each other. Go crazy.
That's what I was going to say. We can just interrupt each other.
Just interrupt each other. Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good. So what was your question again? I'm sorry.
What should people consider before they maybe even start getting into the nuts and bolts of starting a group practice? Like here, I have a solo practice. It's starting to click along a little bit. What are some concepts they should consider before starting a group practice?
Yeah, I think they need to think about how they want to be as a boss. And so, I have people ask me questions like, well, should I hire interns or should I hire, licensed experienced people? Like they're not sure how to make that decision. And so I always suggest think about how you want to be as a boss. And I know for me, similar to Joe, like I don't want to be, working so closely like with somebody who needs the level of help an intern does. That's just not something that I'm passionate about. And so I look to hire, licensed, experienced people who I know can work very independently. And I think the other thing people don't often think about is what kind of culture they want to create in their practice, and that can be whatever you want it to be. It doesn't just have to be an extension of whatever, agency kind of culture that you came from. And to really, not that you necessarily have to be thinking exactly how you're going to do it, but just thinking about why would somebody want to come work for you? Like, what are the benefits besides a paycheck?
Yeah, I think that culture thing for me is something that I, for a long time, felt guilty about because really people just kind of showed up, did the work, and went home. We talked to each other. It's not like we ignored each other, but really it was like we were a place that if you wanted to build extra income, you wanted to build a specialty, maybe even leave your full-time job at a nonprofit, that you could do that. And it took me a while to really feel like, okay, like I'm okay with people just like showing up, killing it, and then going home to their families. And I realized that that's actually kind of how I had approached my nonprofit work too, is I wasn't like besties with all the people at my job. I had, quite a bit of life outside of my work. And so when I started to own that, I realized, okay, we just all want to be really efficient here in how we do our work. So let's actually own that and have that be part of our culture, even though it's not as maybe touchy-feely as how other people might choose to run their practice. Casey, what about you?
Culture is a big one for me too. I think when you're considering a group practice, you're really just thinking about the nuts and bolts. How am I going to do this? How do I structure it? What kind of tax setup do I have? And all of those things are definitely important, but I think the bigger picture is important as well. You have to think about what you're shooting for and what your goals are, so that you're very, that you're all of your planning and all of your work isn't for nothing. You don't want to just do your nuts and bolts and get by day to day and then lose sight of what your purpose is and what you're really there for. And, my practice, we're not like totally touchy-feely or anything like that, I don't guess either, but we want to be the place that people feel like we're an extension of their family, like we want that here. And sometimes that's very exhausting. And sometimes I think, should I really have gone in this direction? But at the end of the day, that's kind of what we want. And so I think what you said, Joe, is really important. Just not feeling bad about what you want at your practice. You can do whatever you want to with it. Just sticking to it, and then all of your decisions making sure that all of your decisions are in line with that culture or that brand.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting to look at the contrast between like practice of the practice and mental wellness counseling. Like with practice of the practice, I do want that like extension of like we're growing and we're connected. So I think some other things that I think of in regards to considering whether or not you want to do a group practice is just what is your flow of phone calls right now? And a lot of people I think have the myth or believe in the myth that they have to have enough phone calls to build referrals outside of them in order to start a group practice. And I've actually seen that oftentimes adding an extra clinician or two, even if they're super part-time, actually becomes a multiplier. And so I would look at what are the calls that are coming in that you're referring out. And so say you're a marriage and family therapist, you mostly focus on couples, maybe you're like Gottman certified or something like that. If you're getting referrals for, kids that are dealing with school issues and you just don't work with that population, that's a natural extension of your work with couples, because there's going to be stressed out parents. They're going to be frustrated. They're going to want to go through some parenting courses or parenting groups, but maybe you don't want to do that work. If you're referring people out for a play therapist or child therapist, then that might be something that you might want to consider. Or if some of your couples end up filing for divorce, maybe you have someone that does help people with that divorce process or does custody evaluation. So I would say start with your specialty and then think about where are all the ways that we're already referring out, even if it's just a handful a month. There's people that they just want to work a couple evenings a month or a couple evenings a week, and they'd be more than happy to take on a couple extra clients. And so if you're just thinking about dipping your toes in it, that's where I would start in regards to just monitoring your level of phone calls that you're referring out. What are other things like that you ladies think would be helpful to consider before people even decide they're going to start a group practice?
Go ahead, Allison.
No, I was just going to say sort of similar to what Joe said. Like, I think the other big question people wrestle with is, am I going to have a practice that's a singular niche, or is it going to be complementary? Like Joe was talking about, there's a couples therapist, there's a kids therapist, there's a, and so there's that sort of natural inter-referral thing that happens. Or maybe you just want to have a singular niche, like we are the play therapy practice in the town and that's all we do. So I don't think there's a right or a wrong. I think it just depends on what your preference is and also what your own specialty is.
Yeah, I think that idea of like, say your play therapy practice, you do want to make sure you look at, like Traverse City, for example. We're a smaller town. We probably just don't have the level of referrals just in town that people are going to say, we need 5 play therapists all under one roof. But it may be that, we're in a smaller town. We're the clinic that helps women in transition. And then each clinician kind of has their own superpowers. That's at least how I frame it out. So here's the person that, in maybe a women's clinic helps with postpartum stuff. And here's the one that helps with single moms. And here's the one that she's really good at people that are going through major transitions like grief or divorce. I think that's how I frame it out. How do you guys frame out maybe how you would think about growing that group practice before you get going?
Yeah, that's exactly how mine is set up, Joe. So the umbrella is women's issues, then everybody has their own specialty.
Yeah. So that's kind of how you did it. Now, Casey, I know that you guys cover a ton of different things. When you were first getting going, how did you decide what types of specialties you were going to kind of focus on hiring for, or did you just focus on bringing people in? Like, how did you decide that at the beginning?
No, well, see, in private practice, my focus was anxiety and panic disorders. And so that's what I marketed in my community. And then my business partner at the time, hers was substance use and addiction. So at the time, we were Mindset Behavioral Group, and we were accepting clients with anxiety and panic disorders and substance use. And then as we found a new clinician that would fit within the culture of our company and our brand, then we would bring them on, and then we would adopt whatever specialty they had. So our umbrella was more of like a specialty practice, and then that left the doors open for if, we had a lady that had specific certification in, it's like got a really, I don't really want to say the wrong name. It was some kind of sexual disorder, whatever. And so it was very specific. And so when we brought her in, then we could advertise for that specialty. So that's kind of how we did it.
Yeah. I think another myth that, and maybe you guys agree or disagree, and that's okay, is that you have to be full before you start to add people. And I would actually say that because it's such a multiplier, that then if you're not full, it's really helpful, because say I do couples counseling with that earlier example, and someone's a play therapist, they may attract some play therapy clients that then the couple say, oh, like we want to work on our own relationship as well. Now I'm going to go work with Joe. I would actually say it's better to start when you're not full, when you're just you have some momentum, your website's set up, you have the basics set up, but you're not full, that's the time to really start to bring in some other specialties. What do you two think?
Yeah, I agree. I was talking to a consulting client the other day, and he was really worried about how to grow his practice, and he was like, but I don't want to bring on another clinician because my other two are not full. And I'm like, well, whenever you have clinicians that have variations in their specialties, it's not like you're having to go get new clients. Use the clients that you have and build the service into their family. So you can work with the parents, you can work with the kids, you can pull in the grandparents, you could do so many different things without having to spend that additional revenue on marketing or that client acquisition cost or whatever you want to call it. Just use the ones that you already have. So I think that makes the most sense too.
Yeah. One of the last things I would say to consider is to just run some of the numbers. I mean, so, if you say right now when you're a solopreneur, if your cost for running business is say 20% with your rent and your internet, all of that, recognize that your costs will change, where you're going to be spending 40 to 60% of everything that comes in is going to be going back to that clinician, whether they're a W-2 or 1099. We can talk splits, but right away you're going to want to say, okay, I know I'm going to get less of the overall percentage because I'm not doing the work, but now it's super scalable. So let's just say that your take home, let's say it's 25%, so it's super conservative. I'm going to just run a couple numbers. Say you had 3 people that were charging $125 per session, and they were each doing 5 sessions a week. So super part-time. Say they were working 48 weeks a year. So that's $90,000 gross. And now let's say we're going to take home 25% of that. That's an extra $22,500 per year you get to take home. I mean, that's like half of a nonprofit salary that you'd have with 5 hours a week. I mean, if you had one person or 3 people that each had an evening and they worked from, 4 till 9 and they did kind of back-to-back sessions, that's really easy to fill 3 people. And so just from saying, okay, I want to start to get closer to that 6-figure mark from just a financial standpoint, when you run those numbers, that often is really inspiring. So let's move on to talking about kind of the very first steps. So someone says, yep, I'm in, you sold me on it. I was on the fence, and now I'm going to start a group practice in the next, say, 3 months. Allison, where should they start?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is you really need to look at the systems that you have in place and make sure that they're suited for a group practice. So there's, certain EHRs that are better for a group than others, or certain phone systems that are better for having multiple extensions versus just one number or one extension. So I think you really have to evaluate those things and make sure, I can add extensions to my phone system, for example, those types of things.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think space is part of that. There's a question in the chat that's saying, should I upgrade my space? My personal thought is really optimize the space that you have. So when you're in that first bit, you want to keep your risk really low. And so the systems that you have set up that can scale, so if your phone system, you can't add extensions, you want to make that switch over to some sort of phone system that's going to allow those extensions to happen, to do something like G Suite, where you can then have a business associates agreement where things are secure like they should be. When you look at a typical, even single office space, even if you're using it full-time for 20 hours a week, if you look at from 8 a.m. until 8 p.m., so 12 hours a day for 4 days a week, that's 48 potential client sessions. And that's not if you're doing back-to-back, like 45-minute sessions. And then if we add in Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and maybe add in 5 or 6 more, really, you usually don't have to upgrade. The rule of thumb that I see is that you can usually have 1 full-time person and 3 part-time people per office, or 2 full-time people and 1 part-time person, if you're looking at totally maximizing it and their schedules align in that way. And so I'd say in general, you don't really need to upgrade your space until you have that revenue coming in and people are saying, I just don't have space or time to see these people because we're running out of space. That's when I would say make that jump to a larger office. Casey, what else would you say would be other first steps that people should take in those, say, first 3 months of getting a group practice going?
Yeah, I like what Allison said about the systems. I personally think that's probably the most important. And looking at that, everything that you have in place, whether it be how your phone rings, how you schedule appointments, ask yourself, is this scalable? If my clients tripled right now, could I make this system work? And at least if you can't, just know that whenever you're scaling your practice, you're going to have to make tweaks and adjustments as you go to your systems. It's the only way that you're going to be able to continue to scale.
I love that question of like, if things tripled, like, could we handle it right away? And so that I think makes a lot of people ask the question of like, why am I answering the phone and doing the scheduling? If you're in a session and 10 calls come in, you're not going to have time in that 15 minutes to make those calls back. So having someone that's an as needed virtual assistant that you're kind of paying by the hour, only when they're on the phone, I mean, that's really like the best use of your money if you're going to scale. I'd say making sure if you're billing insurance, that you have your electronic medical records set up. If you're going to bill insurance, moving towards having some sort of biller. So someone like Practice Solutions, that they just take a 5% off the top of what's collected. Then you're not doing the billing, you're not doing the phones, you're not doing the scheduling. Those are things that really are going to slow down your growth. What else should they consider in that first couple months? I mean, I'm thinking one of the very first things is, do they want W-2 or 1099? Like, do they even know the difference between that?
Yeah.
Is that what's their state say? What's their attorney and accountant say? If they don't have an attorney or accountant, you probably want to chat with one of those at this level. Talk about, maybe each of you talk about how you decided on your model of 1099s or W-2s.
Okay. I'll go real quick. Mine was pretty easy in the beginning. I was on a budget and I was a little scared, so I went with 1099s. As my business started to grow and I started to see the barriers and what was holding me back from scaling to the ability that I wanted to scale, I realized I was going to have to offer the W-2 option. And then as you do grow, you also have to think about, in the beginning, you're trying to save money, so you use the W-2s, but then when you grow and you scale, you're trying to take advantage of different tax laws and tax breaks. And so you can use those W-2 employees as deductions, and that's important. So it's really just thinking, how large are you wanting to scale and what's a better fit for just for you and your personality.
Yeah. And since some of the people are newer here, maybe we should back up and define that. So a W-2 is a typical employee. When you picture jobs you had at a nonprofit or things like that, that's what a W-2 is. So you often will get insurance, you may get other things. It's based on how you kind of want to structure that. So you can do what's a commission-based W-2. And so that means that the person, they either get straight commission, so a percentage of what they bring in, or they may have a base salary or base amount that's at least minimum wage depending on your state, and then a percentage, or it's just a straight, you get either this much per session or this much per hour. Or some people, they'll say, here's how much you get for a clinical hour, it's $45 for that, and then for any hours that you spend like blogging or networking, that's $20 an hour, or staff meetings. And so that's what a W-2 is. You also have way more control. So if you want to make sure that you're able to look at progress notes, you're able to say, here's the systems, I don't want you to be able to wear flip-flops to the work or things like that. If you really want the control, W-2 is probably the way you want to go. And then on the other side is a 1099. So 1099 is a contractor. It's basically a business within your business. And so they have autonomy. They can schedule whenever they want based on when the office is open. They can also work other places. Really, you want to think about your control in the same way that you would have control over the person that might mow your lawn. You're not going to say you have to wear a red t-shirt when you're on my property. You're not going to say to them, you can only be here at this time from this time. Usually most places they'll come, we're going to come sometime during Wednesday, but they won't tell you the exact time. And you're not going to tell them how to run their business. And so for that side, if you want less control, if you want to be more like a colleague and you say, hey, here's how you go market yourself. We're going to help with some of the marketing too. Those are kind of the summaries. Is there anything either of you would add to the W-2 or 1099 differentiation if people aren't sure about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really varies from state to state to, like, if you have W-2 employees, what exactly you have to provide them. So I'm finding out, for example, in Washington State, you have to give them so many hours of sick time per hours worked, things like that. So you just want to make sure that you're, checking with those professionals, with your lawyer, those kinds of things to make sure you're following all those laws. And I would say with the contractors, it's a little bit less. Obviously you want to treat them like a contractor, but there's not as many of those types of things you have to do.
Yeah. Also from a tax standpoint, for the 1099s, they pay all their own taxes. Whereas a W-2, you don't want to have an accountant setting up all the taxes. You don't want to be going through and figuring that out for each month or each quarter, what you have to pay in taxes. So there's a little bit more infrastructure on a W-2. But like Casey said, the scalability in regards to kind of paying less through an hourly oftentimes is there too. What other steps should people consider in regards to maybe their accounting or their hiring when they're in that first few months of growing a group practice?
I think really getting a good accounting system in place is so important. And, I am a huge proponent of, hire the CPA to do your taxes. It's ultimately going to save you money because they're the experts. But you shouldn't necessarily just hand everything over to your accountant and not understand what they're doing or not understand the basics, because you can tell a lot of, what's happening in your business from looking at your numbers, and you can't kind of stick your head in the sand and just say, oh, my accountant handles it, and never look at it. You still have to know at least enough that you can kind of adjust and make decisions based on what's happening with your numbers.
Yeah, I mean, and now there's so many more options that there even weren't, a few years ago when I started. So if you guys go to practicethepractice.com/QuickBooks, the QuickBooks Online, it's like $9 a month, and it'll directly integrate with whatever your payment system is. So that could be Square, it could be Stripe, it could be PayPal. It'll connect with your bank, and it'll spit it all in there. And then you can set up rules that every time it's a restaurant, it goes into the food and beverage. You do want to make sure that you have your business banking account and your personal totally separate. There's so many people I meet that have pretty advanced practices, and they still have it all commingled. That's going to screw you over if the IRS audits you. So you really want to make sure you have a specific bank account that all of your practice money goes into, and then you only do business expenses out of that. So then that'll spit into your QuickBooks, and it'll make it way easier for your accountant and also for you to have a basic idea of what's going on with your numbers. Casey, what else would you add to that in regards to those very first startup, kind of the first couple months of getting a group practice going?
Well, I would like to say something about QuickBooks too.
Yeah.
That was a mistake that I made my first year, is hiring an accountant and not really looking at it myself. What my opinion is, and I strongly believe this, is if you can get your QuickBooks or whatever it is that you're using set up properly and get all of your accounts and all your categories and everything, and really utilize that, if that will gather so much, like how you gather baseline data on your clients and information. That first year that you are doing a group practice or even in private practice, that QuickBooks is going to gather so much data that you can use to launch or to scale beyond that first year. But you need all of that information. We lost our first year. It was just gone because we thought the accountant was reconciling and doing things, and he never entered the first thing. So
now when you say set up properly, drill into that a little bit, because a lot of people are like, that sounds good, but I don't know what that means. Like, what would be some of the set up properly in your mind?
Okay, so in QuickBooks, just, if you're new, I would say you're going to have therapy income. So any income that comes in that is from a therapy service. If you have any other kind of service in your business that you are charging for, have that as a category. You're going to want to have office furniture, office supplies, internet, rent, just basic things, but you want them in the correct category so that when you run the report, which is called the profit and loss statement, all of your money will link correctly to each category, and you can see how much you're spending in each of those areas.
Cool. Well, I think that takes us into processes. So let's talk about, so things get going. Now we're ready to hire someone. Let's first kind of walk through hiring. Like, what do you guys do in regards to figuring someone out in the beginning stages? I know probably both of you have a different thing now that you've scaled a little bit more, but when you first got going, what did you do in regards to bringing on the right people for your culture?
Nothing.
Was that good? I mean, sometimes like the minimum viable product's a good thing, but no, that was a bad decision.
Yeah, it was just like, oh, we need clinicians. We've got all these referrals. Oh, you want a job? Great. Come on. That's not a good strategy.
That didn't work out so well.
No, don't do that. I think you have to go back and just ask yourself what your values are and what your purpose is, and then hire people that fit within that. I wish I knew now then, which it's a learning experience, but I'm very passionate about the ideal team player and those three principles, humble, hungry, and smart. And we use those for every hiring decision that we make. And that's probably been the best thing that we've ever done.
Sweet.
Yeah, I did the same thing Casey did, you know, like you were licensed and you wanted to work
Yeah.
You're a
here,
warm
come on.
body.
Sure.
Yeah, you have an MPI number, come work for me.
You can breathe. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so that led to some bad outcomes. So yeah, so it's very similar to what Casey said. Like I really had to think about what are my values in my practice, what is the culture I'm trying to create, and now when I have an interview, I actually will say, like, this is the culture that I've established now. Like, do you see yourself fitting into that? Is that something that appeals to you or not? Because really, I figure if they're licensed, they're probably a pretty decent therapist. Like, they wouldn't have gotten that far if somebody didn't think they were pretty good. So I'm not as worried about the clinical skills as I am about, are you sort of going to fit in with the rest of the team? And do you get the culture that we're trying to create here?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So someone asked, are you liable for the bad therapist? Like when you say bad, was it like reported to the state bad, or was it just like they weren't a good fit bad?
More like they were a bad fit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that larger liability question points back to the 1099 versus W-2. So if a W-2 does something and someone files a lawsuit, you are more likely to get sued also if they're a W-2, and you'll probably be sued before even the individual would be sued. Whereas a 1099, oftentimes they'll have their own LLC within your company. You're paying the LLC. They have their own insurance that they're liable for, all of that. And so from a liability standpoint, 1099 sometimes mitigates some risk for you if you're concerned about that. What about now? Like, what are some things that you would say if you could go back to past Allison or past Casey and say, hey, don't just hire a warm body. Here's what would really be helpful. What would you suggest to earlier versions of yourself?
The questions that I'm really interested in now are, you know, are you organized? Are you good at managing your time? Do you get your notes done in a timely manner? Because if somebody could be an excellent therapist, but if they're bad at those things, it's going to make my job 10 times harder. So I want to know those things. And that's something I also ask references, like, did they get their notes on time, or like, were they getting in trouble for, you know, their notes being late or whatever? And I'm trying to think, what's the other thing? I just had an interview this morning, so I'm trying to think about what I asked.
I think your process, like Allison said, becomes so much more critical because now that, you know, we've scaled this practice to the point that it is, I'm like looking at the minute. So I'm thinking, if you are lazy and don't want to do your note, or maybe you're not lazy, maybe you have a newborn baby, maybe you have things, and I know that you're not going to be as productive or on top of things like somebody else might, I know that it's going to slow my billing team down. I know that it's going to cause them more work. It's going to cause more work for the front. So you are looking at people that are self-sufficient so that you're not having to babysit them, because as you scale, that it's easy when there's just a few of you, but then when there's 80 or 100 of you, you just cannot do that anymore. So I think that's a really good point, looking for people that are not going to consume your time, people who are very needy, even though they're great and ask a lot of questions. I won't hire them because they suck the life out of me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I mean, really, you as the business owner are the thing that stands in the way or helps accelerate growth and scalability. I mean, it's going to be your vision that really helps you get to that next level. So if you're spending 15 minutes a week extra on somebody, that's an hour a month, that's 12 hours. What would you do with an extra 12 hours to work on your business? It doesn't seem like much when it's a 15-minute, you know, a week needy person, but I mean, it really adds up quickly. And that's a 15-minute person. Just yesterday, I was reading a bunch of research for the book that I'm working on. And I think I want to say it was the Wall Street Journal reported, I don't remember the source, but they found that only 20% of the time, it's like a person's productive in their typical job only 20% of the time, and it gets interrupted every 3 minutes. Mm-hmm. And yeah, when you're in therapy, like you're not getting interrupted for those like 45 minutes or 60 minutes. But just thinking about, you know, if you have a W-2 employee, that a lot of the time they could be wasting, trying to find those people that they're not going to waste your time. They're not going to waste the company's time. They're going to add value to it and make it worth it for you guys to scale. I think that's great to start with that mindset, even with your very first hire. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I remember what I was going to say. I asked you about boundaries, like boundaries with clients, boundaries with starting and ending sessions on time, because I noticed from being a supervisor that it's really hard to teach new therapists good judgment. It's sort of like you either have good judgment or you don't. And so that's why I ask about that, because I feel like, well, if you don't have that good judgment, then you're going to be making bad judgment calls all over the place.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why actually, as a rule, I stopped bringing people on that were, in Michigan, it's a limited license. Some states it's pre-licensed or unlicensed, but basically that they're not the full license. I stopped bringing them on because, for one, when they're fresh out of grad school, they don't have the professional connections to be known in the community. They've worked in a coffee shop, maybe they've worked at a runaway shelter or something like that, but they usually don't have those professional connections. So I say, go spend a year or two getting paid to network. Go work at a nonprofit and sit on the suicide prevention committee, the homeless youth initiative committee. Like, get out there. Don't do counseling in the basement at a nonprofit. Like, be a community coordinator and get some counseling experience, but really more importantly, go network with people so that you can have, you know, a large value that you bring into the practice. And then those people that come back a year or two later and say, hey, I'm fully licensed now, or I'm almost fully licensed and I've had this job where I've sat on all these committees. And now I see that hunger that, you know, Casey was talking about, and that they're really getting out there. And then they've circled back and they've taken that initiative. Yeah, beyond the hiring, what other processes do you guys suggest in regards to kind of a group practice once you have the basics kind of set up?
I think one thing people don't realize is that they have processes, they just haven't written them down. And so even before you start the group practice, you could just spend some time writing it down to make sure, hey, when I do bring on a new person, it's all documented, or make a video or whatever you need to do.
Yeah. I just read Mike Michalowicz's new book, Clockwork, and it was really cool because I had just made my website live, and I read his book, and I think we were like thinking alike, and it made me feel really special because he says in the book, he says, you don't create systems, you capture them, like what Allison just said. It's not like you're creating something, you're already doing it. You just have to figure out what that is. And then once you figure it out, then you think, how can I scale this? How can I trim down the time? How can I work lean? How can I do this? And then that's really getting into that scaling mindset that you're going to want to eventually have.
Yeah. Well, let's talk long-term growth. Okay, so you've got, you know, a couple people going, maybe they're all kind of part-time evenings, and, you know, no matter who it is that's watching or listening, they say, you know what, I really want to grow and scale and get this thing going at a larger level. What tips would you have for people that really want to start growing and scaling their practice?
I think the one thing that I didn't think about was kind of my long-term vision. Like when I started, I just thought, oh, I'll hire somebody and just like see how it goes. And I wish I would have thought like, okay, 5 years from now, what do I want this to look like? Because I think I would have made different decisions along the way. And not that your vision can't change along those 5 years, but I just think like I would have been in a position to avoid a lot of like the growing pains that I've experienced.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. I think just knowing where you're going so you can choose the correct path. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes we all make. And, you know, asking for help, like, I mean, you just being in this community right now is a really good step in the right direction, because this is not something that you should have to figure out alone. You know, there are so many people out there doing what you're doing, and being able to bounce ideas off of someone, or saying, hey, I'm considering this, and then someone can tell you, no, that's a terrible idea. You know, I wouldn't do that. Just not feeling like you have to be isolated, and just accepting help from others.
Yeah, great advice. I think one thing that comes to mind for me is really like knowing financially what you want to achieve. There's always something you can do to grow your business, and it's sort of like, well, when is enough? And so when I'm with like Next Level Mastermind, people that are at that 6 figures and up and 7-figure practices, you know, we talk about like design the life you want, and then put your practice and your big idea into that life. Set those boundaries first of what you want your life to look like. And then from there, you can say, okay, I'm going to reverse engineer what that looks like in my practice and my big idea that I want to launch. At your phase 2, when you're first starting, I would start with, what's the life you want? Okay, so do you want to see 20 sessions a week? If you do, like, what are kind of those boundaries? So for example, I always want to go to my kid's Cub Scout thing, or I always want to drop my kids off at school. So like for me, I want to be able to drop my kids off at school any morning that I want to. Now I may be tired, and so I may have Christina do it a couple mornings a week and sit and drink coffee instead of drop them off. But that's because that's a different thing than I have meetings every single morning. So I know they have to be dropped off between 8 and 8:15, which means I'm never going to schedule a meeting probably before 9 a.m. And so I also know that I want to be there well before dinner. I want to be home between 4:30 and 5. And so that means I'm never going to schedule a meeting at 4:30, because if it goes over, then it's going to be really tough. So I set these basic boundaries. Another maybe times that I choose to do something outside of those, you know, if there's a morning meeting or something that's kind of an outlier, I may decide to do that. But if I start with my life and say, here's the life that I want, that makes it a lot easier to then say, okay, what are the opportunities for the business to grow outside of the time that I've already set? And so then we can say, okay, I'm not going to work Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, but I still have an office Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So why don't I find 1 or 2 people that are willing to work those days? Or I never want to work evenings, but there's still people that want to come in and they want to do marriage counseling, you know, after work at 5:15. Okay, well then I'm going to find someone. So then we've designed our life first and then said, well, now how does my business help support that life as well?
Yeah, I think that's a really great thing. And there's a book called Cash Flow Quadrant that I read like 5 years ago. And it's that same concept, but more from a financial perspective. And I thought that resonated with me then, and just hearing you say it now just made me think of it again. But whenever, you know, he in the book, he always says you have to pay yourself first. Even if you don't know how you're going to pay any of your other bills, pay yourself first. So I kind of think what you just said is the same concept of do you first, and then figure the rest out. And it forces you to become a little creative. And if you know that you only have between the hours of 9 and 4 to get your job done and make money, you'll find a way to do it. So
yeah, and you think about if you have a client that's like, come on, can I please see you for couples counseling at 5:15? And you say yes to that person, who are they probably friends with? Other people that want to see you at 5:15. So then you grow your business in a way that attracts the people you don't want to attract for your business. And so the more that you kind of set those boundaries and then create systems outside of that that other people can support, then it's going to grow the business in the way that you can sustain over a lifetime instead of burning out in 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we've got some questions coming in the chat. If you have extra questions, go ahead and drop those in the chat. I think we may have covered some of these already in our discussion, but we'll try to hit ones that we haven't hit first. In the chat area, please drop in as many questions as you have about group practice, whether that's the starting phase, first steps, processes, long-term. If you just wonder things about us, like my favorite kind of coffee or anything like that, you can ask that too. We are here to entertain and to educate. So that's new. I should write that down, to entertain and educate. That's good. Double
E. We just need to practice that then.
Yeah, practice, education, and entertainment. For our eyes only. All right. So Allison asked about being liable for bad therapists. I think we hit on that. Jasmine says, what interviewing tips would you recommend to make sure you hire someone that would be good fit for your practice culture? I think we hit on that. Any other ideas that you guys have? One thing that, sorry, I just asked you a question. Now I'm going to interrupt and I'm going to keep going. So one thing I do is actually, because we have a smaller group practice, we used to be larger and I've kind of pared it down because more of my focus is on practice the practice now. But when I'm bringing people on, I always start with a cup of coffee. We go out for a cup of coffee. I meet them there first after I review their resume. Because first and foremost, I want to see if there's someone that I enjoy hanging out with. The few times I've hired people against my gut reaction have, like 100% of the time, have turned out poor. And so I would say, for me, getting a cup of coffee with someone, or maybe if they drink tea or kombucha or whatever, like having time to just chat with them, not just about what they believe kind of clinically, but also how does this fit into their career? I'm okay with someone saying, I see being here for maybe 3 years and then I'm going to, move on to something else, or I'm leaving the state. If I know that, that's fine. I just want to know those things up front. What else would you guys say? Any other tips on when you're hiring someone?
Yeah, I would say I definitely have the same experience where I really listen to my gut reaction, and actually just interviewed somebody the other day that, like, the minute I walked into the waiting room and shook her hand, I was like, nope, it's not a good feeling.
Have you ever said that right away and then just walked away? Like, nope, not even.
No, we still had the interview because I was being polite, but Yeah, I think that's so important because I've had the same experience. Like I was sort of on the fence about somebody and I hired them anyway and it ended up really backfiring. So I think there's always that like pressure of like, oh, I have this space, I need to fill it, I have these bills to pay, like, and there's this person who wants to work for me, I should just hire them. But, I say it's worth waiting to find the right fit.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The next question is, does a 1099 set their own rates? Do you decide what percentage you take? So for a 1099, there's lots of ways you can structure it. But typically they start setting their own rates. I recommend that they raise their rates. So I'm always raising my rates throughout the year. And then I try my best to realign people at the beginning of the year. So in October and November, so pretty soon here based on when this is going live, I'm going to be sending out emails to our clients saying our rates are going up to this amount on January 1st. And then we have a very specific email that we'll put into Next Level Practice for you that we use for that rate raise. But if I'm charging $250 per session, and then I have a clinician that's charging $80 a session, that looks super weird. Like, why does that person only charge $80 a session? So I want my clinicians to keep moving up in their amount. Ultimately, they can say, I'm kind of slow, I'm going to reduce my rates. They have that option, but they also understand how weird that looks if they're, half the amount of what I charge or way less than that. The percentage you take, yes, you want to have a contract as part of Next Level Practice. If you just joined, I think it's in month 2, your freebie is that you get our paperwork package for free. So you're going to get that 1099 contract for free that my attorney reviewed, and then you can take it to your attorney to kind of rewrite that. But the percentage split that I do that works for my market is that people are first in what we call the onboarding phase. So they stay in that phase until they bring in $2,500 in 1 month. And then once they do that, then they move out of that phase. And so they could be in that phase for a year if they're just kind of limping along. Then their full clinician phase. So for that phase, the first $1,000 they get 50% of. The next $1,500 they get 65% of. And then above that $2,500 in that month, they get 75% of. And then it resets on the first of the month. And it's money collected. And so since we're private pay, if they saw someone and someone didn't pay, or they're expecting a payment, but that payment doesn't come in until the first, then it goes on to the next month. So that's how I do it. Now, if you have really high rent or you have different costs, you want to look at what makes sense for your business and your scalability. You may give lower amounts, you may not, but that's how I do it. Any other tips on how to set 1099 rates or deciding your percentage?
Yeah, honestly, my contractors just were like, okay, we'll do whatever you think it should be. Like they just went along with, we take a lot of insurance, so it's not like they're, getting that amount of money the majority of the time anyway. So they've just adopted the rate that I set, even though they know they're allowed to set their own rate. And then we do a 60-40 split. So they get 60% of what is collected, and I don't pay them until the money actually comes in, which is nice because that way I'm not having to like front, paying them. So it makes it really easy to hire somebody because I don't need a lot of money to get them started.
Yeah.
Or if you pay them and then the money doesn't come in, then to be like, I need some money back.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, my model is the opposite. I pay them per hour, per billable hour, and then it's the company's liability to make sure we get paid. So they know that they're going to get paid no matter what. They saw the client, they're getting paid for it. And that was just a choice that I had to make to kind of fit with the expectations in my community. And there is a little bit more pressure. You do have to be better on the cash flow management side so that you're not hurting, But,
well, and you have mostly W-2. You have some 1099s too. Actually, 1099s too?
Yeah, I do. I do have them sign a contract though that if they bill a service and it is an error on their end, like some of them will bill a service without a PA and I pay them and then I catch it, that I can recoup that money if I need to. But I've never had to do that. I try not to have to do that.
Yeah, and one question is where each of your practices are. So Casey's in Kentucky and Allison's in Pennsylvania. Another question is, did you interview CPAs? I'd like a CPA who knows the business of a therapist. So I interviewed a CPA through the lens of a service-based business in Traverse City, Michigan. There's not enough therapists to have someone that would specialize in just that. But I did want someone that was familiar with tax codes specific to consulting, therapy, service-based type businesses. Casey and Allison, how did you find your CPA?
I did interview several, and my CPA didn't know anything about therapy business, but I was more looking for someone with a personality that could tolerate all of my questions. So, like I wanted to understand what I was doing and I wanted to learn. And so I found someone he's very expensive, so he doesn't mind for me to come sit at his office for 3 hours. But he will explain. He taught me a lot, and also someone who was open to the profit first system that I use in my business.
Yeah, I think really, I mean, the differentiator I've seen is one that can really optimize your tax situation.
Yeah.
So making sure you're not paying unnecessary taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my CPA was just works with lots of small businesses, and I don't even know if there is a CPA around here that would be familiar with, how a group therapy practice is set up, but it hasn't really been an issue because, at the end of the day, it's still a small business and that's all she does. So yeah, she's been very helpful and seems to know what she's doing.
Yeah. We hit on the office space question a little bit earlier, but I see Nathan kind of asked a follow up. So he said, how big of a space should I look for if I want to grow and I'm on a budget? So my recommendation was earlier to make sure you're optimizing your kind of single office that you already have. I tend to say jump to something that really stretches you that you can afford. And so when you're maxed out in your current space, I would go big. So we were in a single office space originally, and then we jumped to a 4 office space because I really wanted to really scale quickly. And so we went from, I think, 3 people over in the single office to 11 people within a year. And so that was a big jump for us financially and in regards to some risk and having to then bring on a bunch of people. Allison and Casey, how do you handle deciding when to upgrade your space?
Yeah, I wanted to answer this question because I feel like a lot of the folks in my mastermind group struggle with the same thing. And so, when I started, I had a single office. I had 3 people working out of that office, and it was clear that we had really maxed it out and it was time to move up. And it's always like making that leap to the next bigger thing always feels like such a huge mountain to climb. And so then people are like, well, should I then just move up into like a 2 office space? Should I go ahead and rent 4 because I know eventually I'm going to want to hire more people? And so I feel like there's a lot of different ways you could go about doing it. And I think a lot depends too on your finances and how quickly you think you could hire people and fill them up and all of that kind of thing. So I think it's not necessarily a cut and dried type of answer that I can give. I think if I were to do it over and I was going to make that move from that single office that was maxed out, I probably would have looked for a 4 office suite. And if I wasn't able to fill it all up right away, I probably would have subletted for a while to kind of cover all the extra expenses while I was building up the group practice. So again, I think there's lots of different ways to go about it. You might have a different opinion, but I think that's one way.
Whenever I'm looking at kind of these kind of decisions, I always look at like, what's the very best case scenario? So if I go from a 1 office to a 4 office and that thing's full within 6 months, like what's the best case scenario of revenue? What for me is kind of realistic, and then what's worst case scenario? And more times than not, the realistic to the best way outweighs the worst case. And so even if it drops in regards to referrals, you're going to be really motivated. You're going to see that coming. It's not like all of a sudden all the clients stop coming in one day. It's going to be that you see, oh my gosh, like, okay, these people's client loads are down. We need to get more people in here. And then you'll be able to adjust to help pay for that. Casey, I remember from your podcast interview, you guys made a pretty big jump when you were ready to scale. How big of a jump did you guys make from what to what again?
We were in a 1,750 square foot office, and now we have 8,500 square feet. And it went from, I think I was paying like $1,200 a month or something like that to I pay $4,500 a month now. And that, talk about scary. I mean, I had some sleepless nights over that just because, that's huge. And it's a 5-year lease that I'm in. So, I mean, I'm locked down. If you multiply that by, 5 years, it's a lot of money. But for the model that I have, I knew that I was going to need the administrative support to support all of the other, we have 6 other office locations around the state, and we do not have administrative or support staff in any of those. They're more just standalone offices. So all of our administrative staff work out of this one office. So for me, it made more sense, and it put the pressure on to let's fill these offices. And a lot of times I think if you have the space, you'll make it work.
Yeah, I know as soon as we got to the bigger space, I was like, I can't believe this is my office. I feel so like big. But then it was like, I got to get some new therapists in here. Holy cow.
Yeah.
And you know, you really kind of get some traction quickly.
Yeah.
So we're going to be continuing to support you all in Next Level Practice. This will eventually end up in Teachable. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for showing up. More showing up for yourself, because when you commit to this, it really helps you move forward. You're going to see that I'm going to continue to, in the Facebook group, remind you of kind of what it takes to be successful in a month of Next Level Practice. And I would say coming to one of our live events, so something like this, or going through one of the e-courses, don't feel like you have to do it all. I know we have a ton and it feels like you got to keep up with it all. Pick one thing that you really want to focus on. So maybe you attended this today and you're going to take one big action this month. Also, ask at least 3 questions in the Facebook group, or answer at least 3 questions. That keeps the community vibrant. You have a ton of knowledge with what you've figured out that you probably don't even realize that you know. Make sure you're participating in the competition and that you're supporting your groups that you're in. If we can help you in any way, we would love to. And when you're ready to level up past Next Level Practice, Casey and Allison have 2 great mastermind groups. They're also helping me out with Next Level Mastermind, which includes Slowdown School. And pretty soon, you're going to get some information about Killing It Camp, which is going to be our huge conference we're putting on in Estes Park, Colorado, in just a couple weeks here. My wife, Christina, and I are going to go out there and get some video footage, and we're going to look at the space, and we've already got some sponsors lined up for that. So our goal for Killing It Camp is to have 200 to 300 people come out for the largest gathering of just private practice owners. Thank you so much for coming today. I see that Jasmine says, thank you guys. Thank you, Casey. You said in a podcast interview with Joe Act, as if there's no plan B, and that mindset has helped me level up and leave my full-time job. So thanks for staying hungry. Jasmine, awesome. Thanks for that. All of you, thanks for coming. We are so excited you're a part of this community, and keep it up, and we'll talk to you all soon.